"Break the glass and gold will be yours," joked the billionaire. But the poor boy surprised him. The joke detonated across the vault room like a match thrown into gasoline. Laughter burst from the men in tailored suits, sharp and careless, echoing off steel walls and polished stone. The glass case stood between them and a mountain of gold bars stacked with obscene precision, each bar stamped and glowing under surgical lights. On the other side of the glass, a thin boy froze mid-step, his shoulders hunched under the weight of two bulging plastic sacks slung over his back. His eyes flicked from the billionaire's grin to the security cameras blinking red above him. The room smelled like money and metal, and in that instant, the boy understood something dangerous had just been invited into the air. The billionaire leaned closer to the glass, tapping it with one knuckle, the sound ringing clean and cruel. "Go on," he said lightly, as if offering candy. "One smash. One moment of courage. You'll never worry about food again." The men behind him snickered, fingers pointing, eyes bright with anticipation. The boy's breath shortened. He could feel the heat of their attention, the weight of the decision being forced onto him. Somewhere beyond the vault, alarms waited like sleeping beasts. Somewhere inside the boy, something older than fear stirred, and the room, so certain of how this would end, did not notice the silence tightening like a noose. The billionaire's name was Conrad Hawley, and the vault was his private museum of power. It sat beneath his corporate headquarters, a room designed not just to protect wealth, but to display it. He brought people here to remind them of scale, how small they were, how unassailable he was. The suits behind him were board members and guests, men who measured days in percentages and losses in millions. They laughed because laughter was the correct response when the powerful performed cruelty as sport. The boy did not laugh. He stood barefoot on the polished floor, dirt smudged into the lines of his ankles, his clothes patched and faded. He had been told to collect recyclables from the building, to be quick and invisible. He had done that his whole life. Being invisible had kept him alive. Conrad studied the boy as one might study an insect, curious, detached. "What's your name?" he asked, already bored with the answer. The boy swallowed. "Eli," he said. His voice was steady despite the tremor in his hands. He tightened his grip on the sacks, feeling the hard edges of cans and bottles through thin plastic. He had planned to cash them in before the center closed. He had planned to buy bread. "He had not planned for this, Eli," Conrad repeated, tasting it. "You see this?" He gestured grandly to the gold. "That's freedom. That's every door opening at once. People like you spend their lives begging for scraps while the real opportunities sit right here." He smiled again, and it was the smile of a man who had never been told no in a room like this. "All you have to do is break the glass." One of the men snorted. Kid wouldn't last 5 seconds before security dogpiled him. Another added, "Still, it'd be a hell of a story." Conrad raised a hand, silencing them. "Stories matter," he said. "This one teaches initiative." Eli looked at the glass. It was thick, layered, flawless. He could see his reflection in its small, smudged eyes too old for his face. He imagined the sound of shattering, the chaos that would follow, the hands that would drag him down. He imagined the weight of one bar in his palms. He imagined his mother's voice telling him to keep his head down, to never take what wasn't offered. The billionaire had offered. That was the trick. The offer was the trap. "Take your time," Conrad said, checking an expensive watch. "We're enjoying this." Eli set the sacks down slowly. The plastic crinkled, loud in the vault's hush. He stepped closer to the glass, close enough to see the fine dust that never settled on its surface. He raised his hand, fingers spread, and placed his palm against the cold barrier. The gold did not move. It did not beckon. It simply existed, heavy and indifferent. The men leaned forward. One of the cameras adjusted with the software, tracking him. "You know," Conrad said conversationally, "I broke plenty of rules to get where I am." The lie slid out easily. "Rules are for people without vision." Eli didn't answer. He lowered his hand and turned not toward the glass, but toward the control panel set into the wall beside it. Conrad's smile tightened. "That's not for you," he said. "Don't get clever." Eli studied the panel anyway, reading the labels. He had learned to read from library books discarded by richer neighborhoods. Words mattered. He traced them with his eyes. Emergency release. Alarm override. Authorized personnel only. His pulse thudded. The room shifted, subtle as a change in weather. The laughter thinned. "What are you doing?" Conrad asked, the humor draining from his voice. Eli faced them then. "You said break the glass," he said quietly. "You didn't say how." A ripple of irritation moved through the suits. Conrad stepped forward, anger flashing. "Don't touch anything," he snapped. "Security." Eli lifted his hands, palms open. "I won't," he said. "I'm just asking a question." He nodded toward the gold. "If I break it and take one bar, do you keep your word?" Conrad scoffed. "You think I'd let you walk out?" He caught himself, then smoothed his expression. "Of course I would. I'm a man of my word." Eli held his gaze. "Then you won't mind if we make it official." The room stilled. "Official how?" Conrad asked. Eli pointed up. "Cameras," he said. "They're on." "You're joking, right?" "So say it again." "Say it so everyone can hear." A murmur spread. Conrad's jaw tightened. The joke had teeth now, and it was biting back. He glanced at the men behind him, weighing pride against optics. He smiled again, but it was thinner. "You're trying to play me," he said. Eli shook his head. "No," he replied. "I'm trying to understand the rules." Conrad laughed too loudly. "Fine," he said, raising his voice. "If you break the glass and take a bar, you can keep it. Happy?" Applause flickered, uneven and forced. Eli nodded once. He turned back to the case. He did not reach for a tool. He did not swing a fist. Instead, he crouched and picked up one of his sacks, rummaging until he found a small, battered magnet tied with twine. He held it up. The men frowned. "What's that supposed to do?" Someone asked. Eli pressed the magnet to the lower corner of the glass, right where a seam met the frame. He slid it slowly, listening. The sound changed, just a whisper, but enough. He moved it again, testing. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the frame, then at the control panel, then back to the seam. Conrad stepped forward. "Enough," he said. "This is getting tedious." Eli straightened. "You wanted a story," he said. "I'm giving you one." He pulled the magnet away and tapped the seam with his knuckle. Not hard, just precise. There was a faint click. The lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the vault, a relay shifted. The men froze. The glass did not shatter. It did something worse. It slid. Just a fraction of an inch. The alarms did not scream. The gold did not spill. But the room understood, all at once, that the joke had crossed into a place where control could be questioned. Conrad's face drained of color. "Stop," he said. Eli didn't. He stepped back, heart hammering, and raised his voice so the cameras would catch it clean. "You said break the glass," he repeated. "You didn't say I had to be the one to do it." The case shuddered again, obedient to the system it trusted more than men. And in that moment, before the consequences rushed in, before the guards burst through the doors, the poor boy stood straighter than anyone in the room, having found the crack not in the glass, but in the billionaire's certainty. The room did not explode into chaos the way everyone expected. That was the most terrifying part. The glass case stopped moving after that slight, unmistakable slide, as if the vault itself were reconsidering its loyalty. The alarms remained silent. The lights steadied. And in that unnatural calm, Conrad Halle realized something had gone very wrong. His power had always relied on noise guards rushing, systems blaring, people panicking. Silence meant the system was thinking. Silence meant it was no longer obeying him by instinct alone. Step away, Conrad ordered, his voice sharp now, stripped of humor. Right now. Eli didn't move. He stood with his hands at his sides, fingers still trembling, but his eyes were locked on the glass. Not the gold. The glass. The boundary. The thing that separated wanting from taking. Around them, the men in suits shifted uneasily. Jokes died in their throats. One of them reached for his phone, then hesitated, glancing at Conrad for permission that did not come. You said break the glass, Eli said again, softer this time. You didn't say anything about touching the gold. Conrad's jaw tightened. You're trespassing, he snapped. This ends now. He gestured sharply, and 2 security guards stepped into the vault through the reinforced doors. They were big men, trained, efficient. They moved toward Eli with professional boredom, the kind reserved for problems that always ended the same way. Eli saw them. He did not run. Wait, one of the board members said suddenly. He didn't actually steal anything. Conrad shot him a look. He interfered with the secured system. Eli turned to the guards. I'll go, he said calmly. I just want him to answer one thing first. He pointed at Conrad, his fingers steady. Was it a joke? The question hung in the air, heavy as the gold behind the glass. Conrad laughed, sharp and irritated. Of course it was, he said. Do you think I'd give a street kid a fortune because he touched a button? Eli nodded slowly, as if confirming something for himself. Okay, he said. He reached down and picked up his sacks, slinging them back over his shoulders. The guards paused, uncertain. Eli walked toward the exit, past the men in suits, past Conrad. As he passed him, he stopped. You should fix that seam, Eli said quietly. It's not as strong as you think. Then he walked out. The doors closed behind him with a final, echoing thud. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Conrad exploded. Who let him in here? He barked. How did he get access to the vault floor? He spun toward security, fury crackling. Run diagnostics, now. Technicians flooded the control room, screens filled with data. The glass case, once an unquestioned monument to security, was suddenly a liability under scrutiny. Conrad paced, adrenaline burning through him, but beneath the anger was something colder. Unease. Because the boy hadn't been impressed by the gold. That afternoon, Conrad couldn't focus. Meetings blurred. Numbers meant nothing. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the way the glass had moved, not broken, not smashed, but persuaded. He prided himself on understanding systems, markets, people, leverage. He had built an empire by finding weaknesses others missed. And yet a barefoot kid with trash bags had found one in his vault in minutes. Find him, Conrad told his head of security that evening. I want to know everything. They did. Eli lived on the edge of the city in a crumbling apartment complex scheduled for demolition. His mother worked nights at a distribution center, his father long gone. School records showed inconsistent attendance but exceptional test scores when he did attend. Teachers noted intelligence, curiosity, and a tendency to challenge authority. Problematic, one file read. Conrad smirked at that. He recognized the type, or at least he thought he did. Conrad decided to see the boy again. He framed it as charity. A photo opportunity. A redemption arc for the morning's embarrassment. His team arranged a visit to a local community center under the guise of a donation. Cameras were invited, press alerted. Conrad arrived in a tailored suit, smile polished and ready. L.A. was there, helping stack donated books. He froze when he saw Conrad. For a second, fear flickered. Then it vanished. "L.A.," Conrad said warmly, extending a hand. "Good to see you." L.A. looked at the hand. He did not take it. "You found the seam?" he asked instead. The reporters laughed lightly, assuming it was a joke. Conrad's smile stiffened. "I found your file," he replied. "You're smart. Too smart to waste your time digging through trash." Eli shrugged. "Trash tells you what people throw away." Conrad leaned in. "I want to help you," he said, lowering his voice. "Scholarship, mentorship, opportunities people like you don't get." "People like me?" Eli asked. Conrad waved a dismissive hand. "You know what I mean." Eli considered him for a long moment. "You don't want to help," he said. "You want to own the story." The words landed cleanly. A few reporters exchanged glances. Conrad straightened, forcing a laugh. "You have a future, son. Don't sabotage it." Eli picked up another box. "My future isn't behind glass," he said. That night, the clip went viral. Not the vault footage, Conrad had buried that, but the exchange at the community center. Commentators praised Eli's composure, questioned Conrad's tone. Memes spread. "Fix the seam" became a phrase, shorthand for arrogance exposed. Conrad watched it all with growing irritation that tipped into something more dangerous: obsession. He began pulling strings. The recycling center Eli used was shut down for violations. Inspectors showed up at the apartment complex. Eli's mother was written up at work. Subtle pressure, plausible deniability. Conrad told himself it was discipline, a lesson. The world rewarded those who knew their place. Eli noticed. He noticed the timing, the pattern. He noticed because he paid attention to systems. And unlike Conrad, he didn't confuse power with invisibility. One evening, as Eli sorted through a new route for recyclables, he found something unusual in a discarded office bin. Printed schematics. Old, outdated, but familiar. He took them home, spreading them out on the floor. They were vault designs. Not just any vault. Conrad Hale's earlier models. Eli's pulse quickened. He wasn't looking for gold. He was looking for proof. In the quiet of his room, under a flickering light, the poor boy began connecting lines, tracing upgrades, marking where pride had likely overridden caution. He understood something Conrad didn't. Systems evolve, but arrogance leaves patterns. And Conrad Hale, for all his wealth, had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had turned a joke into a challenge. The first thing Eli understood was that Conrad Hale's vault wasn't unique because of its strength. It was unique because of its confidence. The schematics spread across Eli's bedroom floor told a story no press release ever would. Each generation of the vault improved on the last: thicker glass, smarter sensors, faster lockdowns, but the core assumptions never changed. Hale trusted deterrence. He trusted spectacle. He trusted the idea that no one would ever dare test the system seriously because the consequences were too obvious. That was the weakness. Systems built on intimidation assume fear will do the work forever. Fear got lazy. L.A. traced a line with his finger where the emergency release had been relocated years earlier, buried behind a decorative panel. Not removed. Just hidden. He noticed how redundancies were consolidated to speed up maintenance. He noticed how human authorization still overrode automation in very specific circumstances that relied on reputation more than verification. He didn't smile. This wasn't triumph. It was clarity. Across the city, Conrad Halle felt the shift without understanding it. His name had become a punchline online. Investors asked questions they never used to ask. Consultants suggested optics strategies. He paid them to fix the noise, not the cause. He authorized another charitable donation, another interview, another reminder of who he was supposed to be. But the pressure kept building. When the first audit request landed on his desk, he laughed it off. When the second came from a different agency, he frowned. When a third arrived, requesting historical compliance records for non-critical infrastructure, his laughter stopped. "Who's behind this?" he demanded. No one had an answer. At the same time, Eli's world narrowed and sharpened. Inspectors returned to his building with clipboards and threats. His mother came home pale, hands shaking, clutching a termination notice dressed up as a temporary suspension. She tried to smile for him. "We'll manage," she said. Eli nodded. He hugged her. He didn't tell her what he suspected. He started documenting everything. Dates, times, names, photos. He uploaded files to places no one thought to look. He learned how to make backups disappear into plain sight. He learned who benefited when a rule was enforced and who benefited when it was ignored. He learned that power hated records it didn't control. And then he made his move. Not against the vault. Against the story. The first leak was small, a procurement memo showing that Hale's flagship vault used components from a supplier currently under investigation. Harmless on its own. Plausible oversight. Then came internal emails, anonymized, discussing acceptable risk thresholds for public-facing security. Then a clip short clean of Conrad Halle joking about breaking glass and letting a poor kid take the gold. It wasn't illegal. It was worse. It was revealing. The narrative shifted. Journalists began asking why a billionaire would joke about theft in his own vault. Analysts wondered aloud about governance culture. A senator tweeted about wealth performed as sport. Conrad's PR team scrambled, issuing statements about context and humor. Conrad watched his words twist into weapons and felt a heat rise behind his eyes. "Find the source," he ordered. They tried. They traced servers, hit dead ends, followed trails that looped back on themselves. Whoever was doing this understood how to move without leaving fingerprints. Whoever it was wasn't loud. Then the regulators came in person. They walked the vault with neutral faces and too many questions. They tapped glass and noted seams. They asked about emergency releases and override authority. Conrad stood tall, confident, offended. He answered everything. He believed compliance was theater and he had built the stage. Eli watched from a distance as the story unfolded exactly as he'd mapped it. He didn't celebrate, he prepared. Because he knew Conrad Halle would not accept humiliation quietly. And he was right. One evening, as Eli walked home, a black car rolled to a stop beside him. The window slid down. Conrad Halle sat inside alone, the city lights catching the lines in his face. "Get in," he said. Eli didn't flinch. "No." Conrad's smile was thin. "This doesn't have to get ugly." "It already is," Eli replied. One evening, as Eli walked home, a black car rolled to a stop beside him. The window slid down. Conrad Halle sat inside alone, the city lights catching the lines in his face. "Get in," he said. Eli didn't flinch. "No." Conrad's smile was thin. "This doesn't have to get ugly." "It already is," Eli replied. Conrad opened the door himself and stepped out. He was taller than Eli remembered. Close, he smelled like expensive cologne and anger. "You think you're clever," he said softly. "You think you can embarrass me and walk away." "I think systems should tell the truth," Eli said. "Yours didn't." Conrad's eyes hardened. "I can make your life very difficult." "You already did," Eli said. It didn't work. For a moment, Conrad looked at him not as a problem, but as a variable he had misjudged. "What do you want?" he asked. Eli met his gaze. "For you to stop pretending this was a joke." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken threats. Conrad laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You don't get to lecture me," he said. "I built everything you see." Eli shook his head. "You built a room and told people not to touch the glass," he said. "That's not the same thing." Conrad stepped back, fury simmering. "This isn't over." "No," Eli agreed. "It isn't." The next day the final file went live. It wasn't technical. It wasn't dramatic. It was a timeline clean, meticulous showing how enforcement actions against Eli's family aligned perfectly with Conrad Hale's private complaints. It showed calls made and favors asked. It showed a pattern that couldn't be explained away as coincidence. And at the end was a single line transcribed from a recorded call Conrad didn't know existed. "Make him feel small," Conrad had said. "He needs to remember where he belongs." The fallout was immediate. Sponsors pulled out. Board members demanded emergency meetings. Regulators expanded their scope. Conrad Hale went from confident billionaire to defensive executive overnight. He stood at podiums and denied everything, his voice tight, his eyes darting. The jokes stopped. The laughter vanished. And somewhere beneath it all, the vault waited, not as a prize, as evidence. Because what Eli had understood from the beginning, what Conrad had never considered, was that the glass didn't need to break to lose its power. It only needed to be seen clearly. And soon, everyone was looking. The collapse did not come with a single dramatic moment. It came in layers, each one peeling back a version of Conrad Hale the public had never been allowed to see. The board meeting was scheduled for 40 minutes. It lasted 6 hours. Conrad walked in expecting resistance he could crush, objections he could outmaneuver. He had survived scandals before. He had buried lawsuits, bought silence, rewritten narratives. But this time, the room felt different. The faces around the table were not angry. They were cautious, calculating, people who sensed liability and were already planning their exits. The first vote passed unanimously, independent oversight of all Hale infrastructure assets. The second vote passed with only one dissenting voice, his own, temporary suspension of Conrad Hale as acting chairman. The third vote was never finished. Conrad stood up before it could be called, his chair scraping loudly across the floor, the sound echoing in a room that had once risen when he entered. No one looked up. By noon, the markets reacted. By evening, the regulators announced a formal investigation. By morning, Conrad Hale was no longer the man who controlled the room. He was the reason the room was on fire. Across the city, Eli watched the news from a borrowed tablet at the community center. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply exhaled, slowly, as if releasing a breath he had been holding since the vault. Around him, people whispered his name now, some with admiration, some with disbelief. The boy who carried trash bags had become the quiet center of a story too large to ignore. But Conrad wasn't finished. 2 days later, Eli was summoned officially to testify before a regulatory committee. The request was polite. The undertone was not. Eli's mother squeezed his hand when the letter arrived, fear flashing in her eyes. "You don't have to do this," she said. Eli nodded. "I know," he replied, "but I should." The hearing room was smaller than the vault, but heavier. Cameras lined the walls. Microphones waited like traps. Eli sat alone at the table, feet not quite touching the floor, his hands folded neatly in front of him. When Conrad entered, flanked by attorneys, he did not look at Eli. He stared straight ahead, jaw set, eyes hollowed by exhaustion and rage. The questions began gently. Eli answered simply. He explained how the joke had landed, how the offer had been framed, how laughter had turned into pressure. He described the seam, the panel, the silence after the glass moved. He did not accuse, he did not dramatize. He described what happened and let the room decide what it meant. Then the committee played the recording. Conrad's voice filled the chamber, unmistakable and unfiltered. Make him feel small. The sound of it ended the room. Conrad's attorney objected. The chair overruled. Conrad finally turned toward Eli, their eyes meeting across the space. For a moment, something like disbelief flickered across his face. Then something darker. Fear, perhaps not of punishment, but of being seen without armor. Eli met his gaze steadily. When it was over, the verdict wasn't announced. It didn't need to be. The committee adjourned with expressions that said everything. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Conrad didn't answer. He pushed through them, shoulders hunched, a man shrinking under the weight of his own words. The consequences came fast after that. Assets frozen pending review, partnerships dissolved, speaking invitations canceled. The vault once his symbol was seized as evidence. Photos of the gold behind glass ran alongside headlines about arrogance, cruelty, and unchecked power. People didn't talk about the fortune anymore. They talked about the joke. And about the boy who didn't laugh. Eli's life didn't transform overnight. There was no montage of instant wealth, no fairy tale rescue. His mother went back to work somewhere quieter. The apartment stayed small. The routine stayed modest. But something fundamental had shifted. Doors opened not because of pity, but because of respect. A university reached out quietly. A foundation offered support with no strings attached. Engineers and auditors asked questions, genuinely curious. They didn't want Eli to be a symbol. They wanted him to be a voice. He chose carefully. Months later, Eli was invited back to the building, not the vault, but the floor above it. The glass case was gone. The room looked smaller without it, emptier. A woman from the oversight committee stood beside him. We're redesigning the space, she said. Transparency, education. Eli nodded. Glass can stay, he said. Just not where it pretends to be untouchable, she smiled. As for Conrad Halle, his fall was quieter at the end. No trial cameras. No dramatic sentencing. Just settlements, restrictions, and the slow erosion of influence. He kept some of his wealth. He lost what had mattered more to him, authority without question. In interviews he declined. In rooms he was no longer invited into, his name became a cautionary tale. One afternoon, months later, Eli received a single envelope, no return address. Inside was a note, handwritten, the ink pressed hard into the paper. You were right about the seam. That was all. Ale folded the note and placed it in a drawer. He didn't burn it. He didn't frame it. He understood something Conrad never had. The story wasn't about humiliation. It was about correction. Years later, long after the headlines faded, Eli would stand in rooms filled with people who believed systems were too big to question. He would tell them a simple truth, learned young and paid for dearly. You don't have to break the glass to change what's inside. You just have to stop pretending it can't move. And somewhere, in a building redesigned for openness instead of spectacle, light would pass cleanly through glass that no longer existed to intimidate, but to remind. Everyone watching that power only holds when no one dares to test it.